Hey everybody, welcome to DBS Films Podcast. My name is Kel. With me as always is my brother Brendan. Together we make movies with DBS Films. Today's episode, we're going into part 5 of a scene-by-scene breakdown of our newest indie film, that is The Forest of Death. If you haven't seen The Forest of Death yet, be sure to go ahead and take a look online on Amazon because that is the place to see it right now. And again, if you watch it, it means the world to us. Be sure to watch it, leave a review. But in this episode, we're basically highlighting all of the different elements of the movie, going one by one to each scene, kind of explaining what we like and what we don't like. So with that being said, we have just picked up with our heroes and they are not having too good of a time. Basically, Dylan was trying to get some help from Officer Hawk, played by one and only Howard Hawkins. And they gave Joe a call, and Joe ran out there to go save the day. But they are picking up, and they have a injured Tom and a shapeshifter on the prowl. So really, from here, we're about to launch full force into the, end of the movie. And the big thing we've been talking about this whole movie really is pacing. So again, to kind of highlight and start the episode, we are at about 58 minutes here. Again, we lost about 5 minutes in the intro because of just certain filming and issues to just make it cleaner and quicker. But, right about now, we got basically about 10 more minutes left of action-packed adventure. And we've talked about this before, and I think really the clear difference between our first 8 movies, we kind of solidified it a little bit after the Morgan Estate with Jake by the Lake, is you really have a building sense and you have a snowball, moving, and really they're trapped. There's nothing they can do. They have to try and escape. They're in critical peril. And I think the big thing that, we've noticed with this movie is from getting from point A in the intro to here, it's a very smooth process, not only in the pacing that it's set up, but also in the blending of the scene. So you want to just kind of comment where we're at right now in the overall pacing as we set up for our finale?
Yeah, and it's one thing that took me about 8 movies to really kind of figure out is that when you get to the climax, you want to make sure your audience, your viewer knows exactly where they are in this movie. They know what's happened. They understand what's going to happen. They understand the plot, the rules of the creature, the rules of the world. They understand who's good, who's evil, what the threat is. And it seems like common sense, but we struggled a lot with, getting our characters to the climax, and people didn't understand what was going on in the movie, or they didn't understand where the threat was, or they didn't understand what was going on. And if you have to stop and slow down your climax to explain this kind of stuff, then your pacing is going to be off and your climax isn't going to be as impactful as it should be. At this point in the movie, everything should be laid out. All your groundwork should be done. It should be just get your characters from point A to point B, have them die, have them survive. But, whatever you choose, the audience has to be there for the journey because they really want to be with the character. They want to be following the character when they finally get to the end of the movie. And, it seems like common sense, like I said before, but a lot of filmmakers struggle with it. I struggled with it. I see a lot of indie movies struggle with this. So hopefully we can give you a few tips on how to kind of get this to where it needs to go. I feel like our last 3 movies, starting with The Girl in Cabin 13, were really good as far as understanding what was going on. The 2 before that, which was Morgan Estate and Devil in the Room, had a lot of issues. And I think we learned from that and we got better. And I think this climax is good. I don't think it's our best. There's a lot of issues with it, but as far as making sure the audience understands where they are in the movie and what's going to happen next, I think we did a really good job getting our audience members to this point.
I definitely agree. Well, the climax itself, I think, Girl in Cabin 13 kind of stands out as one of the top tier ones that we have. The pacing to this point is really something that I think is by far the best we've ever done. So with that being said, we were picking up Dylan is unsuccessful in really kind of getting any traction of the police. Well, I guess he's got them on the way. And he's got Joe coming, so that's it. What do we hear? We hear a knock on the door, and it's Ashley, but it's not really Ashley. Again, giving Chloe amazing props here. It is our shapeshifter, and she is here to make a deal. And I will say this was another one of those scenes where you were a little bit skeptical at first. You're like, we don't want this thing talking. I was all about it. And the reason I'm all about it is, man, our biggest issue is special effects in the sense of like actual scary looking monsters. So anytime I can have the monster just be another person's body, I'm going to embrace that completely. But basically, Ashley comes up and makes a deal to one, try and get Tom, and then try and get Tracy. It's firmly rejected, but I would say this scene actually played a lot better than I was expecting. Like, I thought it was a good scene. You know, I liked it. I thought it made sense and everything there. But the feedback I've gotten from super fans and then a few people who've reviewed it, they seem to really like this dynamic of, you know, confronting this being that is a shapeshifter and having it talk to you. And I think it's something interesting when you look at horror movies. You know, I look at them something like Freddy Krueger, where you almost kind of, you want some interaction with the villain. And if you typically look at our movies between Carl and Mo and Frank, they don't really interact. So I was kind of curious on what your thoughts are with this scene, but I definitely like it. And, you know, when the Shapeshifter 2.0, I would really spice up the element of, you know, the interaction of this being.
Yeah, I mean, we took this from Girl in Cabin 13. And I honestly thought some of the most or the better scenes in Girl in Cabin 13 were the ones where the masked villains kind of interacted with Chloe and Stu. And that was with them actually writing down the notes. We want the girl, I thought was actually a pretty good scene. And then the scene where Brent takes off his mask and reveals that like he's there to kill them. He doesn't care if they saw his face or not. I thought both those scenes, while, you know, we could have shot them better, while we could have done them better, were actually really cool. And it's, you know, a DBS classic is that stuff that works we bring back. And this was kind of the similar scene to those two. We wanted the shapeshifter to kind of interact and kind of play with them. She could easily break down that door, that window. But there's kind of like this tempting, kind of like messing with them dynamic that we kind of got. But I was very hesitant about this. The scene, like I had two different variations. I might have 3 different variations on scenes that I wanted here. My concern was I didn't want the shapeshifter to really talk. I didn't really want the shapeshifter to do anything other than like kind of look creepy. I thought it would kind of ruin the moment and kind of like, you know, just hurt the overall creepiness of the shapeshifter. But I had talked this over with Chloe, and Chloe did a great job. She said, no, I really want to do this. I think I should talk, and I think I should, you know, interact with them. And she did a great job because the way that she was talking was very unsettling. It was very kind of creepy, which is an amazing contrast between her character in the movie, who's kind of bubbling and more fun. She gets possessed by the shapeshifter and becomes more monotone and sort of creepy. So we added this scene in. We kind of spiced up the scene where she lures Tyler out of the house. I thought she did a really good job. But I mean, if Chloe didn't really embrace this and really do a really good job in pre-production, I don't know if you would have leaned on this as hard as we did. And I honestly am really happy because I think the movie lags a little bit with Tyler just bleeding out on the floor. The Officer Hawk we talked about before, really, you want to get them out in the woods because woods is really scary. We learned from past mistakes. We did turn the lights off in the cabin, but you know, you really want to keep your characters in the spots that are the creepiest, the most prone scares, and that really is the woods because the shapeshifter could be anywhere. You don't know what's happening out there, and you know, there's so many shadows and creepy stuff out there. So I think this scene kind of really saved this part of the movie, and I'm really happy we did it. It kind of is a cool downbeat, and it kind of gives you insight into, you know, the shapeshifter is more calculated and controlling and methodical than your just regular creature that just goes around killing people.
Yeah, I really am a big fan of that. I'm a big fan of like any kind of plot or lore that shows the other side. So I really liked it. Glad it came out well. And again, huge props to Chloe on that one because she nailed that when it comes to just kind of establishing, okay, there's something creepy going on with Ashley. So that being said, then we have really, you know, a little downbeat moment between Dylan and Tracy, kind of, you know, they're panicked, they're feared, and surprise, surprise, she's got the keys. So she gets into the house. One of the things here that's interesting is like, again, I go back to kind of feeling the Tom scene or just like the Roger scares. The actual layout of this house, like she's walking out of like a normal bedroom, but again, movie magic, you don't quite know where she's coming from. So it works with her being able to basically enter and then she's there. And we have the most intense action scene with our choreography here between Tom trying to put a fire poker on Chloe's head and then Dylan just getting stabbed. And I think it's honestly a great little segment here. I mean, again, if you ask me, what is the biggest thing that we, need to improve, I would say it is our special effects and gore type things. But the issue with special effects and gore is they are also very, very expensive and time consuming. I think we're building a team that's getting much better. We have a lot more like the eye scoops, the pepperoni eyes, we have a lot of different things that have been working out there. But realistically, we could easily double, if not triple our budget just by adding in more intense gore and things like that you're typically seeing in a horror movie. That being said, I feel like with what we did, is very it's a very efficient and effective way to show the gore, and it's a nice little combat scene. Shows just how powerful the shapeshifter is by throwing Tom in there. Dylan gets stabbed, so now he's wounded. They flee out of there. Tom basically is like, get out of here and whatnot, and he just gets stabbed a whole bunch of time, and he is unfortunately yeeted. So we did end up picking up 2 or 3 little tiny, it's like for a few seconds, frames just to add and make it a little bit smoother. But overall, I mean, I think this is a slightly above average scene is what I would say, especially for kind of just it being so affordable is kind of the major ones. On the grand scheme, I think it's pretty, generic, straightforward, but on the indie scale, in the sense of how affordable it is and how it gets the job done, I think it's above average. So what are your kind of thoughts on actually getting in there and just wreaking havoc for everyone?
Yeah, I mean, there's not really much I think we could have done to make this a lot better. Obviously having better special effects would have helped out a little bit. But I mean, I've seen a lot of horror movies that aren't just indie horror movies that have done stuff that's worse than this. It's a little janky, but I think it works out pretty well. So other than having like over the top gore where we did something like in Girl in Cabin 13 where she kind of just really guts Tom, I don't really have a way to really make this better, which is usually a good sign. And I thought it did what it needed to do. Dylan needed to get stabbed. Tom needed to die. They need to get out of the cabin. And this was a very, very complicated scene. To give you an example of why cinematic is so difficult is just the amount of cuts, the amount of inserts, the amount of brain power that I had to use to actually kind of figure out what shots I wanted to use and how we were going to actually edit them together was very difficult. And it just goes back to our point of why you should have an on-site editor, because Kel came back, cut the scene together and said, hey, look, we need these little pieces. And if we didn't get those little pieces, the scene probably would have worked, but it would have been really rough. It would not have been smooth at all. And his recommendations, they were little small things. I think it was just Tom hitting the couch, or Ashley hitting the couch and falling on the floor, different reaction shots. And we had like one weird one where someone ran the wrong direction, I believe. But all that stuff just made it look much more smooth. And honestly, as an indie filmmaker, when you're in the heat of the moment and you're, doing this kind of stuff, you're trying to create your shots in your head based on the location that you've never seen before. You're doing blocking that you've never done before. It's very, very difficult to get a smooth shot. Hollywood, if this was done in the Hollywood system, this scene probably would have taken 3 to 4 days, and they probably would have done pickups and made it absolutely perfect. They probably would have had multi-cameras as well. So, it's very difficult as an indie filmmaker. This is probably one of the hardest things to do, is these crazy scenes where there's just a lot of cuts, there's a lot of action. And if you don't have somebody editing this, it's almost 2, 3, 4 times as hard. So I would definitely say, even if you just need to have an editor come in for small specific scenes, identify the scenes. And this one would have been a huge red flag. It's, a big climax moment. It's a death moment. There's special effects. There's blocking. There's stunts. It was very aggressive. It's very ambitious. But at the end of the day, I thought we did a good job. I thought we pulled it off. And now we got our 2 characters out into the woods, which once again is the spooky area that we want to keep them in for the rest of the movie.
Yeah, no, definitely that. And again, I really feel like it's like maybe even a second of frames in total. Like it was just a few ones. It was him hitting the couch differently. So then it wasn't as awkward when he landed. And then I believe it was something with the fire poker for Ashley. But I just remember being like, hey, we just got to get these 2 little inserts. And it made a world of difference because again, you anything that distracts you really then highlights you looking at it, and you're like, well, maybe that blood doesn't look as good, and so on. So super important. I would say this was probably my biggest work as like the live editor. I'm a huge fan of found footage now. I don't really have to do too much, but with the cinematic stuff, you really got to make sure it's flowing right. So we got Dylan and Tracy making their way out, and guess what? It's time for me to flex on my pyrotechnics because we're making a whole bunch of torches. Indie rule for horror: make some fire put in front of their faces. Really it looks great. So we knew from the very beginning we were going to do torches, and we have them come down here and we have them make a torch. I will say, watching this again, I think I would have had Tracy make the torch, but maybe Dylan walks her through making it because he's like wounded and bleeding. So like this was something where like I watched it again and I was like, man, he is doing really good for a stab wound. So this is just a little transition to get them making the torch. That being said, it's a quick scene on sound, breaking the broom handle, wrapping quick. I think it looks great and it sets everything up. But I think my one bit of feedback is probably would have had Tracy do that and have him like, dying in the corner, like grab that, put gasoline on it, tie it tight or something like that. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on this little transition to get the torch going? Our final montage, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really make any sense. I feel like Dylan would be pretty messed up at this point. He'd be like bleeding out. I think the only reason we had Dylan do it is number one, he knew where that stuff was because we foreshadowed this earlier in the movie. And second, we wanted him to lead with the torch so that Tracy can have her moment where she goes and takes it and takes the lead halfway through the climax. But I mean, yeah, it doesn't really make any sense. Like, it's just he probably, I mean, it's a small knife, and he had adrenaline going, so it could work out. But I don't think it's it looked cool. It's a lot harder to make a montage when you're wrapping things. That was also another thing, is like the quick cuts and the break of the stick and all that stuff is good. Having someone like wrap something is just not good to cut. And like his shirt, like ripping the shirt was just a mess. But I think those the torches were also a mess. Like they just were not lighting properly at all that night. But for, we got a ton of footage, we got a ton of coverage. We were able to edit it once again because we're editing masters. And, I thought it turned out well. It did what it needed to do, which was get, fire on their faces.
So first off, I take major offense to the torches weren't lighting correctly. That is complete blasphemy, and how dare you attack my career as a pyrotechnics specialist. First off, it just took a little bit longer for them to light because we were using bug fluid versus your typical kerosene, but it still got the job done. I think the big one to me is, and again, on set, I did not bring this up in the slightest. It was only after watching it, but I feel like I would have finally given Tracy a bone because she doesn't really do anything. She's just kind of floating around. So you could finally have her, maybe she like steps up and it's like, come on, Dylan, let's go. But again, this is why you watch these movies, because now in my head, I'm like, okay, well, let's take a look at it. And honestly, the only reason I thought about it is because it was on someone's review mentioned like, it's kind of odd that he's like perfectly fine there. And I thought, okay, that 1-2 thing. But again, super basic minor thing. We need to get them in the woods. And now I think, so for the woods walking around here, we basically have them running. He hands let's see where I'm at. Okay. So we have them going in there. They're getting the torches. As we're doing this, we have different people being the shapeshifter kind of stalking them. We have Dylan struggling. We do the really cool effect where it's like the fire around his face, which was a nice little one. Then he basically goes to the tree. He sacrifices himself by saying, hey, I can't do this. And again, great acting by Dylan and Tracy on this one. You're holding a torch. You have limited light. You're out in the middle of the forest. Like, these are difficult scenes there. So you want to just kind of talk about the difficulty. We'll kind of lump all of the forest stuff together because I feel like we spent a good 3 to 4 hours out there with torches and a light and waters, and I had to get bigger torch fire, and we were walking a half a mile out there. It's probably 5 to 6 hours now that I think about it. So let's just talk about the torches, the scenes and everything, and exclude the pickups and then the knifing of Dylan. So just talking about torches in the woods.
Yeah, so I mean, you had mentioned before the torches we used a different fluid. I remember it being an issue of like, are these things actually going to light? And then once it did light, we were good to go. But anytime you take actors in the woods, it's always dangerous away from like the location. The only woods that we were able to shoot at that looked dense were maybe a quarter mile away from the property. So we had to walk, we had to bring food, we had to bring water, there's bugs. But I know our crew's very solid and they can spend all night in the woods. Actors are a different story. It's sweaty, it's hot, it's difficult. They're not easy shoots to be in the woods. And I believe this is on day 3. So, fatigue was starting to set in. And I knew I needed to do the climax. And I think we honestly spent I think we probably started shooting at like 8 o'clock and we didn't get out of there till 3 or 4 in the morning. I remember being really long. And my whole thought process was, I'm going to shoot as much as I possibly can until these torches go out, because with the climax, and I knew from editing Murder House that we're going to do a lot of editing. Like this is going to come down to pacing. It's going to come down to editing, because we have another cut point, which was Joe, and we have them running in the woods. So I knew that, we can kind of work it a little bit. So as long as I had the coverage that I needed, we can get it done. That being said, them running back and forth, we didn't get a lot of very good footage. There was a lot of issues with the footage. The woods were very hard to navigate. There was a lot of like stones and stuff. So I was operating the gimbal. It was kind of messy. It was a lot more difficult. I think we just did a really good job in The Girl in Cabin 13, but once again, there's no torches, so it's probably easier. So it definitely was a little bit challenging. I remember getting a little bit frustrated, but we had enough footage to get it done. And the reason that this, is longer than it kind of feels like it, I really did not want this climax to be as long as it is, but because we had to cut that beginning intro, the 8 minutes, I needed to pick up 3 or 4 minutes somewhere. And I had to make a decision. My decision was, hey, let's do it in the woods where there's a threat. There's, it looks cool with the torches, and we can kind of run this for a little bit. But I also think we made the mistake. I think there needed to be either Joe's story needed to be longer, because it was just him driving, which works for a couple cuts, but then it gets repetitive. I think if you would have had Joe going through and then seeing dead Tom all bleeding out and then trying to go find them, it would have been better, because you could also had a pop there at the end with Tracy coming out of that. And then I think maybe just another character or something else, maybe Officer Hawk driving, just to get the 3 different cut points is really the diversification you kind of need to really get one of these climax scenes to work really well. And we did a good job in Girl in Cabin 13, but I think this one just needed a little bit more to kind of really get that climax spiral going.
I definitely agree. I think we lose a lot of clarity in what the goal is what I would say. So you kind of know she's going towards the road or something like that, but they're kind of just wandering around. And you don't really know like how close they are or anything there. So I think having more clarity, maybe a GPS from Joe where it's like 5 minutes out, 2 minutes out or something like that, just to kind of get, maybe something going. But again, I think it gets the job done. Now, talking with the torches, I'm glad you mentioned, because it was difficult. We didn't really use as much as we had for how difficult it was. Let's talk about the reverse of that, something that actually worked out really, really well that took like 2 seconds, which was Ashley wandering around, myself wandering around, all of the basically shapeshifter bodies. And I will say, me with the blood on my face, man, that really ended up looking good. Like, I was like, dang. And again, that was something where I think it was like 5 in the morning and we're like, oh, well, we're done for the day. Okay. Let's just get some more of the footage that we need. And I was like, hey, let's get me walking around and doing this. Like, we knew we were kind of going to use it, but that stuff really adds a ton to it. And it is those cut points there. And on the counter, we used a lot of that footage. And what did that take us? Like 3 minutes to film total?
Yeah. And this is one of the benefits of editing, is that if you read some of the scripts, I'm like, just get all these shots and it's just a list of shots, because I don't know what's going to turn out well or what we're going to use. And I knew that we needed some kind of a threat, some kind of chase of Dylan and Tracy. So I figured we can use the people that were in the movie before that were dead, that the shapeshifters kind of transforming to. I didn't know if it was going to work because I didn't know how well. I thought it was going to confuse people. I really thought people were going to get super confused. They're like, why is Kel back? Who is that person? Like, what is going on? I thought Ashley they could understand, but the rest people will get really confused, and nobody brought it up. I thought it looked really good. I thought it was really cool. The only person we were missing was Roger, pretty much out there. But yeah, I mean, like Kel said, like when you're an editor and you understand this kind of stuff, it's just easy shots, whether it's just B-roll, whether it's just shots that you may or may not use. If somebody on set is like, hey, should we get this? I just get it because it's right there. It takes 5 seconds. And this was a huge problem in the first 8 movies that we did. I'd ask for something or somebody else would ask for a shot and they'd just be like, no, we can't do that. And because they just didn't want to get it. And it caused a lot of friction on set. There's a lot of issues. And then we went to editing. We were missing B-roll. We were missing shots. Nothing kind of cut together. And we had to do pickups ourselves. So, and the only reason that was occurring is because I was an editor at the time. So I think the big shift was we became editors. We started editing the stuff ourselves. And you may not know whether or not things are going to cut together. Like sometimes I'm like, 100% sure I know exactly how this is going to cut together. Other times I'm not going to be as confident. And when I'm not as confident, I just get as much coverage. I get as much stuff as possible. I look for possible inserts. I look for anything that it can kind of like, essentially we call it now a stew, where I can put it all in there and worry about it later, because you do not want to get to the point where you don't have enough stew to, make something good. You got to have all your ingredients in there. And that's pretty much like what we're doing with the Roger project. I have no idea how this thing's going to edit together, but I'm confident that I have enough footage to, sit down and really make this movie work.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's definitely a change in mindset of having all of those things ready and accessible. So we're going to go ahead and move on to what is my favorite scene in the movie, and that is Saving Private Dylan. And basically with this one, we have our shapeshifter is being confronted by Dylan, who's egging them on. And what happens? Well, you get an amazing tackle. So great pop scare. Really looks great. Have them fall on the floor. Have a struggle. Filmed very well. Have Ashley and then turns into Tracy. And then an incredibly good special effect knife kill with a blood spit out. I think this is our best scene in the movie. Very, very, very good. 10 out of 10. What are your thoughts?
I mean, it goes down to pre-production. I showed it to all the actors, but this is another reason why you should be watching a lot of movies. And obviously you should be watching big budget movies and you should be watching small indie movies. And I spend most of my time watching small indie movies, but Saving Private Ryan is one of my favorite movies. In this scene, which is essentially a copy of or a homage to Saving Private Ryan, we don't copy things around here. We give respect because Spielberg's such a good director. It's a very graphic and gruesome scene, and it always sticks with me. And I always wanted to try and do. I've tried to put it in other movies, but I was like, this is the spot to do it. And do we do it as well as them? No. But for what we did on the indie level with what we were trying to do, I thought we did a really good job of, trying to get the whole creepiness of her whispering, shh, it's okay, everything will be all right. The cut where she lifts her arm up and then transforms into the shapeshifter, I thought was really cool. But this is a really cool scene. I was really happy to, kind of to try it out because I was really excited about it. But we showed all the actors, they knew what they were trying to do. It's just a textbook example of when everybody's on the same page and understands what they need to do, how well a scene can come together. And, that scene, Saving Private Ryan, probably cost them $25,000, $50,000, $75,000 to get it done. And we probably made that for like $100, honestly. I think it was just special effects and the time of, the other actors and everything. So, just because you're an indie filmmaker doesn't mean you can't do Hollywood shots. Are they going to look as good? Probably not, but you can still get the same effect. You just got to be a little bit more creative.
Exactly that. I remember filming it when we were like in that process, like, "Ooh, this is going to be good. This is going to be good." And then when I edited it, I was like, okay, this is great. So I think that to me is going to be a scene you probably likely see us rework a few more times. From there, we kind of do a little bit more of the same, just kind of killing some time. We cut back to this. We have Joe going. I will say Joe because we're basically running through the forest now. Tracy, her light just went out, so she's basically done for. We have Joe get here. I will say I do like Tracy coming out of the woods in the truck view. I don't know why, but I really think that's an aesthetically pleasing shot. So let's go ahead and talk about now. Joe pulls up, Tracy comes running out. She's got her hands up. I think that's great. She lures them there. We got Joe looking like a stud with this shotgun ready. And, surprise, surprise, we hit you with a little twist that I would say is very expected. But here's the thing. Everything's been done to some degree. So, I'm happy with that ending. Like, I've seen a lot of people like, oh, we kind of expected that ending there. But at the same sense, I'm happy with leaving that twist of it's, Tracy's dead body there. I think that is just a nice, perfect way to sum it up. Sure, you can be creative. Sure, you can do something different. But when we were writing that and we knew that, we're like, this is solid. This makes sense. It leaves it with a very clean ending of no one survives. Spoiler. But at this point in time, the whole movie's been spoiled, so we're gonna go ahead and do this. But I like it. I think Joe getting here and working with Tracy it's a nice. It's not the big explosion at the end. I think the highest point is that knife scene with Ashley and Dylan, but I think it concludes it very, very nicely.
Yeah, I love the shot where she comes out in the truck. I think it's like that is the optimal found footage shot. It just looks realistic. It's a wide shot. You have her run out in front of the car. It looked really cool. I thought it was great. I just think for the climax, if we're going to keep this same story structure, Joe should have went to the apartment first, and he should have went in there and saw Tom being killed and then got back in the truck and then drove to Tracy. I think Tracy and Dylan needed a place to go, or the audience, like, you have to give your characters a location to go to. I don't know if that was like Joe's house or something, because a cool thing would have been if they're running out there and Joe's going back to the apartment, they're actually running away from help. And then Joe's like, what the heck? And they're going to Joe's place, and then they're getting closer. Then Joe's going back to Joe's place or something. Like, he can call Roger and be like, I'm heading back. I'll pick you up and we can go get these guys. So then you have both characters heading the same direction. And like you said, I thought you actually had a good idea with the map quest saying how far away they are. And that would have got that time crunch. It would have been really cool. So you could have had that in there, but I would have really also followed Tracy around a little bit more. We just didn't really get a lot of footage of Tracy when Dylan was dead. And this might have been because the torches were out, or we just, were tired at that point. I can't really remember why, but we don't have a lot of just Tracy going through the woods. And I thought she should have had just a little bit of journey, maybe like hiding behind a tree, seeing Ashley walking behind there, something there. But if we would have followed Tracy around a little bit more and then had her see like the car lights and run towards the car and then cut back to Joe. And then when that cut happens, she dies off. She becomes a shapeshifter. I think it would have sold it a little bit more, because then you're like, oh, she's coming out. She sees Joe, because it picks up with her running out there. You would have thought, oh, she's saved. But we don't have that piece. I think that's why that ending falls just a little bit flat. But I mean, dude, there's like 4 characters in this movie. One is going to be the shapeshifter. And really, if you have Dylan and Tracy out there and Dylan's dead, there is nobody else in this movie at the point that is alive other than Roger. And he is like passed out from drinking beers on the couch. So, we made this movie for a reason to test out the concept. If you don't have a lot of characters in a shapeshifter movie, you're gonna just, especially if you're killing them, you're just gonna run out of characters, and that's what we did. But I do think the couple of tweaks that I talked about would be beneficial to doing this again if we wanted to keep the same similar story structure. But once again, you only get this information by finishing uploading a project. I could not tell this during the script. I could not tell this during shooting. I really couldn't tell this during editing. It's only until I uploaded, I was like, oh man, like, we almost had it. We just needed a little bit more to kind of give that climax that little oomph that it needed to be, like, really satisfying.
Yeah, I think the big issue that you were talking about, now kind of percolating in my brain is, one, this was such a huge shoot that, like, even if we were like, I think you could really make this big where like you bring Joe and Roger and then they split up. So you got Roger with a gun hunting, whatever's there to find them. Joe could go back to the apartment. You could do a ton, but I think the biggest issue with that would be time. And I think we knew that. We made the ending basically succinct in the sense that, okay, we don't have to get it. I think the minor fix that you just hit on would have been when her torch dies, she should have saw the headlights. And if she saw the headlights and starts running towards them, that probably would have then given us the extra. Because I think we showed our hands when the torch went out. And it's like, all right, she's dead.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's just small little tweaks. But it's good. It is what it is. I thought it was solid, but I really think that like to do a shapeshifter movie, I think you pick either the Dylan or Tracy character and you put them in a group of people that they don't really know. Maybe they're just brought along as friends, like a casual invite to come out here, chill at like a lake house for the weekend. And it's them with like 10 or 11 different people that they don't really know. And the shapeshifter infiltrates in there. And I think that's how you do this movie. Cause then it becomes more of like a whodunit. Who is the shapeshifter? Who's not the shapeshifter? But it's told through the eyes of only that character. And I think this one of the issues we had was it's told through all the characters' eyes, Ashley's characters, Tom's characters, Dylan and Tracy's characters. They all have their own scenes, but it kind of waters down the movie. I think you really got to pick one character if you're doing the shapeshifter. It's their point of view, and you kind of got to stick with it. And I think that's just something that's unique to a shapeshifter script. But I think if you really want to kind of do this, you kind of got to make it like a little murder mystery. I think that's just what you got to do. And to write something like that's a little bit more difficult, but I'm really hoping if Shapeshifter continues to climb the charts like it's doing, we could take a stab at it. Cause I think it would be really kind of fun. It'd be really unique. But if you watch like The Thing, one of my favorite horror movies, they do it very well. It's like, who is the shapeshifter? And that is the real spice of that story.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I'm glad you already started talking about what we would do differently, because that is going to be our next episode. We're basically going to hop into what we would do if we had access to, a bigger budget for the shapeshifter type movie. But I do want to go ahead and end it on just kind of overall, now that we've been through the scene by scene. I think for me personally, when I look at Forests of Death, I see one of our biggest accomplishments in just production. This is a beast of a movie. This was a concept that from the very beginning, I was like, oh my goodness gracious, like, what are we doing here? Already what you were saying, you really want to have 10 or 11 people. Like, that's how you can really flush out this idea. So I think being able to take this production, have it done, and then have it really be a testament to our improvement in pacing is just a huge milestone at DBS. Again, we're always proud of each and every one of our movies, but I think, of the Cabin core, which is going to be Girl in Cabin 13, Haunted in the Murder House, and Forest of Death, those three movies, I think the Forest of Death to me is our crack at a really bigger production, kind of like a Devil in the Room or a Morgan Estate, in the sense of these are big ideas that, like, again, you have a budget, it becomes exponentially better. And I think, this applies to all of our movies, but Girl in Cabin 13 is a very contained concept. Haunting of the Murder House, very contained concept. Forest of Death is a big, big concept. And the reason I like that a lot is if we do go on to remake it, then that really opens it up to be something like you were talking about, having a lot of capability. So to me, I think more than anything, this is like a very shining badge of honor that we got the production done and the pacing so good. Because after this, we move on to found footage. And found footage is a completely different breed, super easy, love it. It's great to go, easy production, easy way through, easy everything. Cinematic, completely different beast. So I'm very happy that we ended on a good cinematic with pacing and everything there, because it would have really sucked to flop our last cinematic before going back to the pacing of these ones.
Yeah, I think my appreciation for this movie really comes down to three different aspects. The first one would just be cinematography. I thought we took a big step up in both production and cinematography. This movie looks very cinematic. I really spent a lot of time cheating the Netflix look. We shot the whole thing in a 50. So you have like the nice bokeh. And I think the sound quality is really good. There wasn't a lot of issues with sound. I thought everything's clear. I thought the special effects and the Foley and the music were all really good. And, that was the first time we kind of really hit the production. Going through quality control, they gave me a couple things to fix. And really, those things, I don't think they should have even been flagged, but we made the changes and everything was fine. That's, different from what we had with Girl in Cabin 13 and Murder House, which had a pretty big laundry list of things that I needed to fix. I think the pacing's the other big thing. And I was really, really happy with how we paced this movie. I thought it started really well with a very big, impactful hook, and it went all the way through. It never really slowed down. I thought the only point where it really could have slowed down was the Roger fire pit scene. And he did such a great job of delivering that scene that people just breezed right through it. And then, like you were saying, man, the concept, the high concept of this movie, which is this shapeshifter, the rules of the world, the lore, what happened to the people before, how it operates, how there is so much story and lore in this movie. It's ridiculous. And if you look at like a lot of indie movies, a lot of our other movies, to develop this kind of story is extremely, extremely, extremely difficult. To develop a story like this on a budget is even more difficult. And to develop a story like this in only an hour and 20 minutes is almost impossible. And I thought we pulled it off really well. Everyone knew what was going on. They knew what the threat was. They knew exactly how it worked. They knew it was afraid of fire. They knew everything about this movie. We didn't have to explain it. I didn't have one person be like, I don't know what's going on. I don't understand this. And I think that's a big step up, because to deliver this story, this concept, and put it in this nice little package and make sure people understand it is a huge win. There's just so many indie films out there where I'm just like, I have no idea what's going on. I don't know where we are in this plot. I don't know what's going on. To use a visual medium and tell a story, you think it's kind of easy, but it's really one of the most difficult things, especially for indie filmmakers.
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with all of that. I think it's one that I would say, and this is usually what happens because it's one of the newer ones, it's like you're most proud of it. But to give you an idea, I mean, I hated the plot of Girl in Cabin 13. I think Murder House is okay. I loved Forest of Death, because to me, it is that bigger concept. It is one of those things. And now I say hate in the sense of everyone has their own personal opinions. I think Girl in Cabin 13 is a fantastic movie, gets the plot done. I think there's something there, but this was a plot where I was very, very excited about. But on the same sense, I was incredibly nervous because it was something big. So that's going to go ahead and wrap up this episode. Again, if you haven't seen Forest of Death, and we've explained all of the scenes, you really should go check it out now. If you want to do that, you can just go to Amazon, take a look at it online, also on Vudu, iTunes, Google Play, a few other outlets as well. You can also get the DVD and Blu-ray coming very, very soon. So all those things support us. We absolutely love it. Be sure to take a look at our Discord channel online, because we make movies for our fans with our fans. So if you ever wanted to be on set, behind scenes, all of that fun stuff, it's a place to be. But until then, have a good one.